moving on to punctuation and grammar. So there is this Google Doc that goes over every single grammar and punctuation rule you need to know for the reading SAT. So if you don't want to listen to me babble, you can just go ahead and read this doc. This is my annotated version where I highlighted some important things and wrote some of my personal notes in red. But if you want to see the unedited version, I'll also link that below. So in this following presentation, I'll basically be going over everything I highlighted and wrote in red. Alright, punctuation and grammar. So there's three ways to connect independent clauses, which are basically complete sentences. The first way is with a period, of course. The second way is with a semicolon. And the third way is with a comma and a fanboy. And you're usually only going to see and or but as your fanboys. You're not going to see for and yet and so and whatever the other ones are. Just really and but. So if you ever get a question that looks like this, where you have to fix a punctuation mistake by either putting in a period or a semicolon or a comma and a fanboy, you can instantly mark all three of these out as being wrong. And the reason for this is because they're all technically right. They all do the exact same function, so there's no one right way to do it. And there's no all of the above answer choice, which means that you can just mark them all out. So if looking at a semicolon kind of trips you out, you can just replace it with a period. Just imagine it's a period, because that's all it is, a glorified period. So you can go ahead and mark all of those out, and then your only answer choice left would be D, which makes it the correct answer choice. Alright, so we can use commas to list 3 or more items. So in this sentence, I have been to Epcot, Hollywood Studios, and Animal Kingdom. Epcot would be our first item, Hollywood Studios would be our second, and Animal Kingdom our third. But what if we had a sentence like this? I have been to several capitals including London, United Kingdom, Tokyo, Japan, and Paris, France. The problem with this though is that using commas, it's gonna state that London is your first item, and then your United Kingdom the second, Tokyo third, Japan fourth, Paris fifth, and France sixth. But in reality, we want London and United Kingdom to go together as our first item, Tokyo, Japan as our second, and Paris, France as our third. So there is a way to fix this, and instead we have to use semicolons. So instead of having these commas here after our country, which is United Kingdom and Japan here, instead we're going to replace those with semicolons. Now it's going to work as intended, with London, United Kingdom being our first item, Tokyo, Japan as our second, and Paris, France as our third. So basically, moral of the story is whenever you have lists that are already using commas, so like when you're stating capitals of cities, capitals of countries, sorry. Whenever you're stating capitals of countries and you're already using commas, instead you want to separate items using semicolons. So this means that there's 2 ways to use semicolons. The first way is to use it to connect independent clauses, and the second way is to use it to list items when they already have a comma. Alright, next up we have colons. So the formula for using colons is that you're going to have an independent clause before the colon, and then you're going to have an explanation, a description, or a list. It really doesn't matter. The really number one important thing is that it's always an independent clause before the colon. Whatever's after doesn't matter, just needs an independent clause before. So an example of this would be I love many games, Genshin, Valorant, and Elden Ring. And yes, never mind. Anyways, I love many games is going to be our independent clause, and then Genshin, Valorant, and Elden Ring are going to be our list. Now, a very common mistake with this is when you have this word right here, including. So when you have the sentence instead, I love many games including, and then Genshin, Valorant, and Elden Ring, this is actually wrong, because this first part is no longer an independent clause. Since you added including, it's, well, no longer an independent clause. It's now a dependent clause. I don't know. It's just not an independent clause anymore. So don't use including. Then we have single dashes, and these basically work the exact same as colons. So if you remember, periods and semicolons, they both the same thing. Colons and single dashes, they're both the same thing. They have the exact same formula too. You have your independent clause before your single dash, I was about to say colon, and then you have your explanation or your description or your list, whatever after. Once again, always has to be an independent clause before, it follows the exact same rules. So here we have the exact same sentence, I love many games, Genshin, Valorant, and Elden Ring. Instead, I just replaced the colon with the single dash. Exact same mistake as well. You add including, it's no longer an independent clause here, so it's incorrect. So you can see single dashes and colons, they basically work the exact same, which means just like with periods and semicolons, if you ever see a question that has a colon or a single dash in it as an answer choice, you can think them as the exact same thing. You can think that there's both colons, or you can think they're both single dashes. Whatever the case is, they're both the exact same thing. They both have the exact same function. They both cannot be right, which means they're both wrong instead. So now your answer is going to be C or D. Um, in this case, it doesn't really matter what the answer is because it's just an example. But the important thing to know is that they both do the exact same thing. Last but not least, we have essential and non-essential clauses. So this first example, the Asian who is very smart and talented is Min. Your essential clause is going to be who is very smart and talented. In this next example, the Asian who is very smart and talented is Min. Your non-essential clause is going to be who is very smart and talented. So you might be thinking, what's the difference between an essential and non-essential clause? Well, there's a very tiny difference, and that's in the essential clause, there's no punctuation separating the who is very smart and talented part. Whereas in the non-essential clause, there is punctuation. And in this case, it's going to be 2 commas. It doesn't have to just be commas though, it can also be dashes. So these are called double dashes, and they function the same way as commas. So that's how you know the difference between, well, that's how you like visually see the difference between an essential clause and a non-essential clause. But what's the difference in meaning? Well, instead of saying essential clause, let's just say it as important information. All right, that who is very smart and talented, that's important information. Okay, it's super important to the sense that this Asian guy named Min is very smart and talented. You can't just take that part out without changing the meaning of the sentence. So this is a no-go. Whereas in a non-essential clause, instead of calling it that super long word, let's say it's not important information. So that who is very smart and talented, since it's between punctuation this time, it's not gonna be that important. So yeah, it's cool to know there's this Asian guy, his name is Min, but it's not gonna be that important to the sense that he's smart and talented. So what you can do is you can just go ahead and cross that middle section out. Now, what's so important about crossing this section out? Well, when you actually start reading questions and doing questions, it's going to be so much easier to break down those super long paragraphs. Because if you have a whole bunch of words, like this sentence, Asian who's very blah 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 blah, instead of reading that whole thing, you can just read Asian is Min. Because that important, I mean, it's not important, that is middle section, you don't need to read it. So I understand that this could be a little difficult to comprehend at first because it was very confusing for me at first too. But when you actually start putting it in practice, it's going to be a lot easier to understand. And that should also be the case for all the previous grammar rules. So I will go over a few punctuation questions and hopefully that clears stuff up. Anyways, that was all the punctuation and grammar rules, and I know that was a lot to take in for the easiest section of the SAT, but once you actually start putting that practice in, it's going to be so much easier to do, and these questions should only take you like 5 to 10 seconds max. Bye! Alright, I lied. I'm back. So this is one of those questions where you actually have to read the whole paragraph to understand it, and I'm gonna show you how you find that non-essential clause and take it out. So let's start reading. So right here, there's a comma right here and a comma right here. And if you go ahead and mark everything out in the middle, you'll see that the sentence still flows pretty nicely, since most other studies have found that whatever. So you can take this whole chunk out, the sentence still flows nice, and now it's gonna be a little bit easier to digest. I know it's only like one tiny sentence here, but there are gonna be some cases where taking that non-essential clause out is going to help.